Humayun Sheikh, thanks for coming up on stage. Very interesting, early investor in DeepMind. I'm going to join you all. Let me grab a seat here, and we'll just jump right in. Mark, can't resist. One of the things you shared with us earlier, I think is one of the most important topics that we have to cover. It's your name. There's some security concerns with it. One of the things you shared with us earlier is that a lot of people share your name, and it turns out to, let's say, at-risk individuals. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think there's senators from Michigan and South Carolina that have the name Mark Meadows. And so for the sake of, let's say, some public encryption, I use the Stephen in the middle. So it's sort of, I guess, a way that I can kind of keep my identity out of the courthouse.
Yeah, I mean, given kind of just the long history of senators or anyone in politics, the trouble they get into and the risks inherent in the position, we share your potential pain. Some on the panel don't have that risk, thankfully, but I want to jump and dive right into this. It's a really big and scary area for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to touch it because of its implications. But let's start and set a framework, though. Humayun, I want to start with you to establish that. What's the current landscape right now? Because it seems like there's a whole bunch of devices and data floating around there already, and just like Bill Tai is at the cusp of social impact, we're all at the cusp of potentially everything being used against us or in the wrong way, all of our data to discriminate or otherwise challenge ourselves. Tell us about the current environment.
Yeah, so if you look at it in the terms of, let's say, artificial intelligence and how we are developing this artificial intelligence, what it means is that all your data, all your devices which are connected to you, they're providing all this data which is going into developing this intelligence. Now, the people who are developing this intelligence, they have an influence on what is being developed. And if you want their influence to be a bit more ethical, or it doesn't matter which way you want it to be, it has to be defined from bottom up. There has to be a framework. But it seems like at the moment, the current state is that we don't have that framework in place.
Well, where's the framework coming from? Let's talk about that.
The framework is coming from participation. People who are participating in building this technology or training this technology, that's the framework which needs to be in place so that we know how we're going to build and train this technology. Because, there is a lot of fear about AI going rogue and kind of trying to take over the world. There might be some truth in it in the long term, but initially, if we don't get this connectivity right and we don't take into account the inclusion of everybody, there is a risk that we might develop something which doesn't actually fit everybody's model, and it's something which needs to be then readjusted.
And Adrian,
I was going to say, think about it this way: who's parenting Sophia, right? We have now a robot, an AI robot that has citizenship in Dubai, I think, right? She's a machine. But someone has to parent her and teach her.
Are you offering to adopt her?
I've met her, and I don't know if I could handle her. I already have a handful with the one I got, so.
Inclusion's a good example.
Right.
I'll just hold that thought for a moment. I mean, even just looking at this panel, by way of just an analogy to what Humayun just pointed out, it's about participation and inclusion. Last time I observed, there's probably roughly half of the population of the U.S. and roughly the world is women, but here you are as one woman of, let's see, we have, there's 6 of us on this panel. Yeah. I think it illustrates your point, Humayun.
Absolutely, and I think if we develop, for example, and this is not the indication of the current state, but I'm just giving you an example. If AI, or which is we expect it to take over the world, is developed by all white male from the West, then I think there's something wrong.
That's how the internet was born, and it was not inclusion of women because it was men in basements working, all hours of the night, talking to each other over some chat
Right.
apps.
So that's a mistake, perhaps. Could we call it that and
Well,
categorize
it wasn't that it was a mistake. That was just what happened. And we know that that happened. So now that we're developing blockchain, it's imperative that women take a step forward and take leadership roles, get on boards, become co-founders, and step up, which is why there's so many women in blockchain groups. And Crypto Queens is here, and I run Crypto Vixens. And the whole point is to get more women in the conversation, because I think that diversity is necessary. And also not, I look at teams and I go, okay, so that's 8 old white guys. You kind of need to change that up if you want it to work for everyone.
Sure, and that's at a ground level. I do want to say on this topic, because it's so important, more than any other group, women make up half of the population of the world.
And 80% of the buying decisions, so you should really be nice to us.
Sure, so give us a prescription.
Yeah. Always have a woman on the panel. I want to thank Crypto Finance Conference, because in Geneva they had a few manels, and I was like, don't ever do that again, and they didn't. There's so many women, and fabulous, really brilliant women. Always put them in the room, put them on the panels, put them in the conversations. If you're running a team, you're running a project, find them. If you can't find them, text me, call me, whatever. I have binders full of women. Yeah. It's not a problem. I will get you the right exact person to make your project awesome.
So, Amit, I want to go to you, and I want to go back to your thought, but I want to ask you this question and pick up where Adrian just left off, though, is simply mere diversity in numbers for inclusion, as Ian pointed out, is that enough?
It's important, it's necessary, it's not enough, right? So I think the challenge is not just do we have enough women or minorities to bring a balance of representation. When it comes to AI, a lot of it has to do with the data that the AI is being trained on, right? We have inherent bias in society across the board, right? And these neural nets are being trained on the data that's available. And I'll give you 2 very quick examples. There was a little program run in a police department where they tried to automate the process of granting bail. And they used, a lot of data. It's a very manual process. There's a judge who says you can have bail or not, what the amount would be. And what they found when they started running it was that if you were a white woman, and this is a positive here, above the age of 32, you got bail by that system every time, regardless of the crime, at the lowest possible rate. If you were a black male under the age of 24, you either never got bail, or if you did, it was always at the highest possible level. A recruitment system that ingests 1 million resumes and then starts to discern patterns, and then is fed 10,000 that were actually hired, discerns more patterns, can now be used to get in the 10,000 applicants for your new job, and will show you the 5 resumes that you should hire. 4 will be male, 3 will be white. That's not because a bunch of 10 male 40-year-old programmers sat in a basement and coded this. It's because they ingested data that exists in society today.
And so that's the key point. Bad data in, bad actions out. Who is parenting these AIs? Otherwise, we're going to end up with the rise of the machines and Lord of the Flies. That's not really going to be good.
Thanks, Adrian. I want to, and we can get right back to that. And this is us digging in more granularly. And it's not just about constitution. I want to turn to your background with data science, Jared. You've had a rich history with that and understanding inputs. But it looks like we're all screwed. Most of that data already is coming from white males. Sure, there's some diversity. We've already talked about a bit of that, but there's also even more of a history. And then also on top of that, the people building these systems that pull the data in are also those same people who are already dominating the data sets.
Yeah, I think I take maybe a more utopian view of all this kind of thing. Like we're moving into this world where data is captured by all these IoT devices and sensors, and is managed by blockchains and automated by artificial intelligence. And I think if you're looking at what some companies are starting to do, where they're putting these puzzle pieces together, things like insurance companies that are playing with dynamic auto insurance rates that basically adjust your rate based on how it how the sensors in the car thinks how safe your driving is, basically. And the sensors don't care, who you are, what your gender is. It's just like using this data to adjust what you're paying based on your safety. And I think in that kind of example, it's kind of more democratic than the current system, where insurance rates are given out by gender and age and type of car that you're driving and whatnot, where I think that's kind of like a more ideal use case where you pay based on your own actions.
But we'll challenge that, though. I want to go to Mark, because he could potentially face some discrimination in a very interesting way. Jared, even in this relatively benign example for car insurance rates, for those of you who don't know, senators have immunity, right, Mark? Mm-hmm. And so your two other Mark Meadows peers could much more easily get out of a DUI, for example, than you could. And isn't it right that a DUI might affect your car insurance rates? Yeah. So you could, all three of you, Mark Meadows, have the same behavior, and you would pay more.
Yeah, so this is why we need data curation models, right? Because currently Facebook has the best AI system on the planet. Google has the best AI system on the planet. It's based on the data that we fed it. But that doesn't necessarily mean whether it's because of socioeconomic profiling or because of affect detection in my voice that we can identify what's going to be more valuable. So we need to have open libraries that allow people to say, this set of data, like Sophie has written in AI ML, for example, and this particular set of linguistic data is serving its particular purpose, whether it's in a courthouse or in a data center, better than this other set of data. So I need to be able to rate that and say, this is better. This particular piece of data has more value. And within data curation models, then we can begin to separate the real Mark Stephen Meadows from the other Mark Meadows, because we have people that are manually sifting through in an open system rather than something that's centralized and closed. Does that make sense?
It does agree, but we'll press on that some more. Now, Amit, I want to go back to you. And also, I know you're still holding a first thought that you have, and I want to address that after we address something first, and then we'll unpack that. The layer I want to get to here, though, is that there appear to be a lot of inherent biases in the existing architecture around the world. Various governments discriminate against certain subgroups more than others, but in general, they appear to be discriminating, and generally people agree that, and in fact, a lot of economists have been able to prove that out. Is it our job here? Is it AI's job to take an opportunity to try to correct some of those factors?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I think it's the community that we're all part of that needs to take a very active role in deliberately, and I think Mark alluded just to that, in deliberately making sure that we treat this now. Because, look, we are codifying society into these AI systems. Right. They're going to run society at scale. 5 years from now, you're going to find it very hard when you have a neural net which has like umpteen layers that are one layer driving the other in terms of what it decides to do, to be able to reverse engineer and say, oh, that was bad, we need to change that, our data model was bad. So we need to take very active steps. And if we don't, then it will be too late. So the steps are not just at a data level. I think we have to have a far more holistic view of it. So how do we think about how the neural nets are built? We have to think about, do we have normalization models that we can build into data? And they can be in the way that Mark suggested, that you would have some level of a combination of AI and manual curation that allows for the better performing data sets to rise above versus others. And I just think that we have to do a better job with educating not the people sitting in this room, because we represent 1% of this little bubble that we all agree with the things that we're talking about. How do we take this narrative out to, I always use the example, my 70-year-old mom. It's not an age thing, it's just she's out of this conversation that we have. And part of it is about the narrative, because we haven't touched upon the issue of privacy, which I think actually supersedes bias, right? You mentioned, Humayun, about all this intelligence. In the world prior to AI, when Facebook had your data, what did they do with it? They monetize it, but they basically gave you a personalized ad. And you're like, oh, I talked about that yesterday, and look at this ad show up, right?
Now they
And-
just listen to your phone and it shows up.
Right, but it's not only that they're listening, and that's a huge issue, but now with AI, you don't have just, I can show you something, you have actionable intelligence. Because this AI can actually put together a lot of these data points, contextualize them, and take actions on your behalf. Conversations we're having, right, are being pushed up into the cloud to be processed. And if we're naive enough to think that they're in the hands of good actors, which they're not bad actors, they're commercial actors, right? And Cambridge Analytica was an example of a commercial act that went wrong, right? And so we have to think about a lot more of that, and how do you get that message out to the 99% of the world that's participating in this?
I disagree. We shouldn't get the message out yet because we haven't actually figured out what we want to tell them. We're at the point of having this ethical consideration, right? You talk about, so we put the data in, we know it's biased, we've realized that we have a racism issue and a bias issue, and that's humanity. Then the question is, do we fix it? Well, think about it in terms of genetics. We have the ability to do DNA snippets or changing, we could get rid of certain disabilities. Well, then those people who have the disabilities are like, are you telling me that I'm a mistake, right? Could we get rid of cancer? I think we would all say, yes, that would be amazing, right? But someone who has Down syndrome, if we say, well, we're going to eliminate Down syndrome, do we, don't we? That is literally a debate going on right now. And
I think just to add to that, the problem is that we are actually already saying what we shouldn't be saying. Should we? Who is we?
We.
And
Right.
the point is, you're going back to centralization and the whole idea, if we want this system to evolve correctly.
I'm going to come right back to you, Yumin, because you were next, and we're going to talk about Facebook a bit more. But I mean, I want to just make sure, I think you got to answer your first thought earlier, which was on, where you were holding your tongue on inherent bias. Were you able to get your points?
Yeah, I
across?
think I
Okay.
talked through the model of the data
Yeah.
rather
Great.
than the actors.
So,
right?
I mean, one thing that I believe was Mark pointed out was that Facebook has the best,
AI.
essentially AI engine. Or was it you, Adrian?
He did.
Yeah, great. So Human, that's where you just picked up, which is like, who is doing the what? I mean, all we've
Who is
heard
we?
is outrage.
Who is we? That's
Exactly.
literally the question.
Right. Well, and it sounds like, at least to start, one early kind of leader in this space will be Facebook because of the trove of data.
I disagree, it's Google, it's not Facebook.
It's Google.
I disagree. It's Baidu, not Google. So in the order of who's doing the most with AI, let's get off our American high horses. It's Baidu and Tencent, and then we get into the Googles and
Baidu or
Facebooks.
Baidu, the dating app?
No, Baidu,
Oh.
the big Chinese.
Chinese.
And this is a
search
great
everything giant.
illustration
Got it.
of why diversity matters right there. I almost expect applause for that one.
Okay.
You mean more broadly though? Let's challenge that assumption, right? I mean, that's the whole point. Is that this is the problem? These are centralized entities.
Absolutely, that is the problem.
So how do we get around that?
Well, if we're all here because we believe in crypto, and I think crypto is one thing, but decentralization is a little bit different. And I think if you look at how you can use decentralization to actually deliver this new wave of connectivity, because it's the connectivity. What Facebook does, what Google does, they're all connecting things. If Facebook's connecting people to people, Google is connecting people to businesses and people to people using their ads, using the search engine. Uber is connecting people to taxis. If you look at, I mean, there's Booking.com connecting us to hotels. So it's all about connecting things and connecting people, which then brings you back into IoT. Now, what I'm saying is that we need to have a decentralized system designed in a way that nobody controls it and everybody learns from it. Now, that will bring diversity, and that diversity will take care of itself. So we shouldn't be saying, we are going to build something. Let us build something. I think that's where the difference is. And if you get the framework and the incentives right, You'll get the people in right. Then you can add all these algorithms. You should have a system which is plug and play, which is, okay, this algorithm is not right, or this algorithm for this country works. We can't get rid of the borders. I mean, the countries are going to be countries, and we're going to be controlling various things. But you need a system which is adaptable enough that it can work cross-border. We do have trade agreements. Well, we can have this new wave of this connectivity. And that connectivity is autonomous connectivity. So we need to design a system, when I say we, all of us, has to be that it's a system which is like a internet, for example. Internet is built by us, the techno people. However, everybody can use it in a different way. We have to do the same. We have to do the same again. At the moment, the AI is not being built that way.
But if I can quickly just add to that.
Just hold it. I want to go to Mark on this, because it sounds absolutely impractical. We have Amazon, we have Baidu owning numbers of IoT devices, all of these kind of the Ubers of the world. They're not going to want to give up any of that hardware and let anyone on stage, or all of us, as you say, Humayun, to have any impact or input on something that they can dictate entirely today. Is that true, Mark?
Well, it definitely seems that there are large actors on the landscape, and as we push out open source solutions that all of us can use, and as we look at really not just competitive differentiators, but collaborative differentiators, we say, in order for us to confront these giants that are centralized and are currently controlling many of the decisions and even the emotions that we see on our screen, we have to all work together, and we have to open this thing up so that as a collective, we can begin to build self-reinforcement systems that are able to learn and then confront those larger models. In other words, it's by acting as us that we can confront one of them.
But it's a governance issue. So how do you decide which governance model, which ethical construct? You have I can only do what's in my best interest, and that's an ethical construct. Well, so I could go murder somebody. Well, no, because then you get put in jail, and then that's not really in your best interest. And you dive down through these. In my ethics class, we had 15 different ones we had to look at. They're all different. They all work in the end. But who's to decide which one of those we use? And we do have to decide on some form of governance.
Is there an ideal, Amit? Is there an ideal regime?
So I think that in all of this conversation, we're just shifting the we. And in my opinion, if there's a governance model, right, it's the we governance model, right?
Right.
And instead, to me, the ideal is that we shift if we get the conversation right, going back to that issue of the narrative, how do we include the other 95% or 99% in the conversation in a way that they understand what's happening and they're not just recipients of this technology and its implications? Then market forces end up becoming a really, really good driver for what Uber or Google or Baidu can or can't do. And once you have people involved in that conversation, startups will build where they think the opportunity lies. And if the opportunity lies in building something that is pro-privacy, pro-decentralized data, a model that is not the traditional, I'll do whatever I want, because I know that people are asking for that, it actually changes it. It's not a quick answer, but I think that's a much better way than saying, we will govern, we will change the we.
But I don't know. I know you have a thought there, Jared. But I want to challenge this one too. Certainly, when throughout the South and elsewhere, separate but equal happened, market forces weren't sufficient, Jared, to permit black students to go to schools that were allocated only to whites, or even sit at a diner, for example. Government organs had to step in. So where's the daylight?
I mean, you're right, of course. I think, maybe it's still kind of the rose-colored glasses thing, but we're talking about market forces and all these major centralized companies that seem impossible to take down. But I really believe that blockchain, just as a technology, lends itself to sort of like positive social impact and trends. It's this sort of democratization through decentralization. And in the case of a company like Facebook, like a centralized advertising company making its revenue from advertisers' brand dollars, I believe it's just a better business model to have a decentralized advertising platform. I mean, Facebook and all these other centralized players are working on this kind of like 1 in 1,000 people clicks on an ad, engagement's really bad, and then they pocket all of the advertisers' dollars. If you're a decentralized advertising platform, you get to put that money directly into the consumer's pockets by letting consumers interact with brands directly on a one-to-one basis, kind of like a decentralized model. So I believe that the future is going to kind of move itself in that direction, just because it's better for brands, it's better for consumers, and the only people that it hurts in the long run are centralized companies like Facebook, still built on the old kind of centralized advertising model, which is a specific example. But
Hugh, on this note, look, we've seen kind of legacy companies. Let me give some really quick examples. The whole hotel industry take on kind of the Airbnbs of the world. They couldn't compete on market forces, as Amit would point out, and certainly ran to government to use it as a tool, a blunt instrument to attack it. The taxi lobby versus Uber and Lyft is another great example. We could go on and on. Is it really true that what Jared's saying, that blockchain is different? It's different this time?
In economic terms, it doesn't have to be different. It's a race to zero. Why these big companies came into play was because the economic model was correct. They reduced the costs of you connecting to other things. Otherwise, you had to do Yellow Pages and pick up a directory and call somebody. It went to Google, and the reason was because the search was better. The cost of searching somebody was down. Then the cost of connectivity. So that's all what Uber does. It reduces the cost of connectivity. It's an intermediary, but it charges you for it. You pay for it. Now, if you can come up with the economic model which is even better, it's even cheaper to connect two parties together without the big intermediaries in the middle, the economic forces will come to play. Of course, there will be resistance because these companies have a lot of money and the governments will be behind it. But in the end, the economic model will just take care of itself, which is what you're saying.
To some degree, but I don't remember the U.S. Civil War being necessarily settled non-violently through market forces. Mark,
I think we have cyber warfare now. I think we're good. We don't necessarily have to spill the blood of patriots to ensure our liberty.
Yeah, but an extreme example, and Mark, I'll go to you on this. Slavery, now practically everyone would agree, is unethical, but that wasn't always the case.
And it's not always illegal all over the world either.
No, and it's maybe even the foundation of society, historically speaking. Not just that it's illegal now, it might still be the foundation of society. And I think that as we look at the ethical problems here, what we're really discussing, and thank you, Amit, by the way, I think, to try to trap the thing it's about who has the ability to make the decision over what I or any of us individually do. And AI presents three primary problems that I can see, which is the displacement of jobs. We have these problems of invasion of privacy, and then we also have lack of control. But interestingly, blockchain somehow solves those, or it offers us some solutions to move these things in a position where AI, if we are tying the data that is being curated to compensation of the end user that's either submitting or using the data, then we can begin to look at new work models, and we can begin to solve that first problem. And so too with the second and third via monetizing open source via blockchain. So I think blockchain has come in to solve ethical problems that AI has introduced. And whether it's slavery or not, we're still putting all of our data into Facebook and into Baidu, and that model has to be changed.
But I like Facebook. I've sold my soul to Google. It makes my life easier. My entire world runs through Google and Facebook, and I'm okay with that. And I trust those organizations. Would I trust a decentralized, I'm not so sure who has access to my data and all of my data is out there and tied to me? And good gracious, in 5 years when we have quantum, somebody's going to be able to unpack that and be like, ooh, that's the porn you watch? Like, Really?
Well, let's.
I'm just not so sure how I feel about that. I'm totally fine with Google knowing, because then it gives me better suggestions. But do I want the general public to know?
Maybe,
that's
maybe not. Maybe not. And let's drill down this. You're a company, Lolly. I know you've at least flirted, no pun intended, with for example, sexually transmitted diseases on the blockchain.
What I did,
And-
it wasn't the diseases on the blockchain. It was prompting interpersonal communication, which is very lacking in mainstream heterosexual relationships. The gay community got that down. It's like STD test, HIV status, that's within the first 30 seconds. That's down, no problem. Not in heterosexual. So what I'm trying to do is inspire better conversation, not necessarily recording everything to the blockchain for somebody to future snoop and then put it out on TMZ.
But by doing this, even if your intent is something else, doesn't it still present a challenge?
No, because I
where
don't put
you're
STDs testing on the blockchain. I have people actually speak words to each other.
which AI can discern and maybe be able to draw even more information from. But I think your comment about I trust Google, right? Or I trust Alexa, or I trust Facebook.
Oh, I don't know about Alexa. I'm not so sure. She and I are not
or
necessarily
Google,
friends.
It's again, who's the we, right?
Yeah.
It's such a we live in this relatively, you could argue now, non-authoritarian country. but for 60% of the world's population, things that you put in as search terms or you say to a listening device can lead to
Jail.
persecution or prosecution, and in
Or
some
death.
places execution, right?
Right.
And so again, we shouldn't take that lightly because it's convenient to us. To your point of
You have to school
did
your
it require
thoughts, not
did
just
it
your
require
words.
a government intervention for the slavery issue, or for black men to have some form of agency? It did as the actor, because that's how it was set up, but it happened because there was a groundswell and a movement, and that's what I refer to as the equivalent of market forces. And if that had not happened, and we had not been actively talking about the LGBTQ condition, India passed a law decriminalizing gay sex day before yesterday. India. It was
Just
illegal.
now. Day
right?
before yesterday.
Day before yesterday.
It's 2018. How long have people been having sex with each other?
Right. And it took a groundswell of more acceptance and people talking about it for a government body to come in and do that.
Is this where the world is headed, Jared? Where there's just maybe this utopia, as they call it, an increased awareness? Are you just going to reveal, or rather, are people just going to reveal if they have sexual transmitted diseases, or they've cannibalized a person in the past or enslaved one?
Oh my goodness, that's quite a loaded question. But I think, it kind of makes your imagination go, it can just run wild, because it's really hard for any of us to say where the world is headed. Individually, each of these technologies is so massive, just each one can affect the world and create such an impact, like IoT, blockchain, AI. And I think it's hard to kind of understand what happens when the three of them converge. I think IoT needs to exist with blockchain and AI, because you've got however many tens of billions of sensors, and then you want them to be able to communicate with each other and be secure and learn and adapt and all that. And now, we're looking at things like Bill Tai, who's just on stage, his company, Treasure Data, absolutely massive data management platform, crazy amount of data in there, sold for $600 million to SoftBank, which happens to own ARM, which powers, that's the chips for almost all the IoT devices in the world today. And I think
Right.
SoftBank said ARM is going to produce something like 1 trillion chips over the next 20 years.
So they'll now have the devices, the chips, the intelligence. There's no
gets better.
such thing as privacy.
They
There
just
never has
acquired
been,
an
though.
AI
But
company.
that's the point.
Right.
I think if you are saying that all these devices are going to come and they're going to become centralized, of course you don't have privacy. But if you are saying that I want to control my own devices, then you can have privacy. So the point is that you're saying, I don't want to trust myself for controlling my own privacy. In a decentralized system, that's what you should have.
You should, okay, but that would require a society that actually understood personal responsibility and self-reliance and doesn't have to have somebody that they can call and go, oh crap, I lost my keys. Can you please credit me that back? We have not engineered society that way.
We live in a society. We have homes, we have locks, we have keys. I mean, we know how to deal with that. We have to evolve into that.
No,
You can't just keep
friends.
having.
The majority of people are not that smart.
Right.
But that's the framework.
It sounds like you might be asking a lot. At least there's an argument there to be made.
But that's the framework which needs to be simplified. And if we're going to build it for that purpose, then it has to be simplified to that level where people can deal with it.
What if it doesn't come?
When is it? When are you expecting it to come? If you're asking our 70-year-old relatives to kind of learn that, then it's not going to happen. But if you're asking my child who is, let's say, 3, who can actually look at the phone and without telling him anything can deal with it, then that's their future, not ours.
But perhaps yes. On this note, though, so Jared, you're intimately familiar with the effectiveness of a lot of these social media platforms, including in Asia, but certainly in the U.S. at building communities, building audiences. They're all centralized. Where is the inherent conflict? Is it among? Is it in the choice of being able to participate?
Yeah, I suppose that does pose a conflict. I mean, it's hard to say where these things are going to go. I don't think any of us really know how this ends up over the next 5 or 10 years. I think that these new technologies provide an ability to monetize data better, which is going to lend itself to more of these kind of like decentralized companies, which are more utopian, at least as far as we're concerned. But as far as people being able to opt in or opt out, I think that's kind of like, it is sort of frightening in a way. Like even if we do have this positive viewpoint of all of it, like to have that much data constantly collected in every facet of your life, like how do you opt in? How do you opt out? Is it even realistic? Like,
and who's making the judgment calls on what that data actually means?
Right. Even like today with Facebook, they can figure out, like even if you haven't opted into certain things, Facebook can figure out things about your friends just because of like data points that they have on you. Right. So even if you've personally opted out and you're like, screw Facebook, this is too much, like these companies have so much data and the AI is already to the point where they can figure out things that you don't want them to know about you.
But they also have power and then occasionally will ban me for nothing for 24 hours and then life ceases to exist for a day.
What are you doing to get banned?
I uploaded 40 pictures into an old picture folder, and they were like, "That was too many all at once."
It could be punitive. It could be censorship, and so those are some of the concerns. I also want to drill down more specifically with you, Adrian, because you articulated a list of names, and some you trusted, and some you didn't.
Right.
What distinguishes the two?
Usefulness, the ability of me to reach out and smack their legal department and get what I want, if necessary. So decentralized, okay, so I'm a female, but thankfully with a very large social following and a blue check. That's kind of like going on the table every now and again.
But not everyone has that privilege.
No, but I do, thankfully. And so when I trust a company, it's because I know that I can make them behave if they need to. And if I have to on behalf of someone who doesn't have my reach and my clout, then I can, on their behalf, on someone who is an innocent victim of something, get them justice. You can't do that in a decentralized thing. In a DAO, there's no, what do you do?
But that's not even a 1% privilege. That's a 0.0001% privilege, right? But it also comes down to how we speak about data. We're again talking about data because we live in this world, and data is a very abstract concept for most of the world. Unless we get into specifics and say what of your data you're willing to share. As an example, is it things I say? Is it places I go? Is it transactions I make? If you can even start grouping things into these kind of boxes that are easy for people to understand, and then say, look, give consent. You can think about monetization models, sure, but at least give them agency first and say, this is what you can give consent to, because it's not just the ability and the power to be able to say, I'm in or I'm opting in or opting out. I think it's about the education of what you're giving consent to
Like,
that the world doesn't have.
Like understanding that sometimes when you hook your Facebook to your Amazon, every Amazon purchase will be posted to your Facebook page, and maybe if you're shopping for a naughty bachelor party, that might not be good.
Mark, I want to give you the last word, and I do want to. I know
with you
there's
more.
a lot of questions that are likely to come. You're shaking your head.
Well, yeah, I think what you bring up about whether or not we have the choice to enter into the system. I mean, GDPR tries to provide us with that exit hatch. And that's as it should be. We should all have the opportunity to not be remembered by the system. But it's really, the more educated we are about the data, the more I find myself disinclined to participate. And so Lex, which is part of Amazon's Alexa cluster, in the skills store, you can submit something for the Alexa, and then the developer gets back a set of data. But the data that doesn't come back is the affect. There's over 200 vectors in a person's voice that you can measure, whether, age, gender, whether you grew up, whether they're drunk, and supposedly whether they're gay. And that data didn't come back to developers from Amazon. And that provided a level of education for those developers to then say, wait, we don't want to develop in here anymore. And so I think that if we can all of us build together to educate ourselves about the value of the data and then provide that escape hatch, perhaps there's an ethical solution.
I still want to get one more thought from Himyun on this. Mark sounds like an idealist of kumbaya, let's all work together. How is this going to actually happen, given these deep-rooted, deep-seated, now government-entwined, private centralized entities going to be overtaken by what I understand your view is what ought to be decentralized networks?
It's not going. It's an evolution. It's not a revolution. And the evolution would result in change of business models and a little bit more democratization of this data and AI space. I don't think the centralized businesses are going to disappear just yet, but there will be a lot more awareness of decentralization. And
are you referring to the more recent media coverage? Effectively, negative news will drive us to disengage with Facebook and look for an alternative that's a decentralized
I don't think we'll disengage
platform?
with Facebook because it's providing a service. I think what would happen is they will change their business model to adapt. That's what would happen. And this should be a catalyst for actually that change. The more we decentralize, their business model will evolve into something else. And we've seen it again and again, always seen it, and it will happen again. And I think this time it will be the decentralization of kind of data and AI, which would possibly drive it into the next bit.
I want to say, I do not think that governments are going to allow, they're going to try not to allow blockchain, decentralization, and holacracy and self-governance because they don't want to give up the power structure. That has been eons of building to get to a pinnacle of power and control. And I just don't think the human will allow that to.
Are you saying that there's a conspiracy where governments rely on these centralized data troves to then enforce whatever in the name of security initiatives?
Yes, which is why the TSA searches my bag every single time, and the last 8 times it's missed the flight.
It's also why I don't have a single friend that lives in China that is upset about the centralized artificial intelligence system that's tracking everybody that's moving around through the streets, right? I don't know anybody that's over there living in that system that's complaining about it.
But isn't
So
that the
answer is
human
yes.
condition, Mark, that we just adapt to the world we live in?
Right.
And that's the challenge. I mean, if we don't change that actively, we don't educate and
It will be
get
small
more people.
changes, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
It will
It
be
sounds
small
like
changes.
you're making a challenge to Chinese government in asking perhaps the question, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to Mark, do they have a voice?
Absolutely. Look, I think fundamentally, everything that the Chinese government is doing with the whole credit score system. I mean,
The social credit
the social
score.
credit score
It's
system
crazy.
is crazy. You're walking around with a score on your head for everything you do, and not just you do. Like you're my friend, and now you get a negative score for behavior because you said something that wasn't complimentary to the Chinese government. That's a huge
And then
issue.
he's going to actually
Well, I
get a
asked the
negative tick
question.
because he's friends with you and he actually talked to you and you're radioactive. That's a problem.
Exactly. So I think absolutely. I believe we have to challenge all of that. And if we don't do that, and if it doesn't, it's not a groundswell because we educate that groundswell to happen. To Humayun's point, Facebook is not going to be vanquished by another social network that's similar. It's going to be because there are decentralized social networks that drive it to start adapting and changing its model. Does it survive and remain the dominant one? Maybe.
Maybe not.
We're just out of time. We're really just the tip of the iceberg on this topic. I do want a round of applause for our panelists.